The World Wide Web is many things to many Americans. To one segment of the U.S. population, it is pretty much the largest movie multiplex ever conceived. Anytime, day or night, they can go to the page of one of the many streaming services and watch the movies of their choice on demand. Some sites, like Vudu, show the films for free. Others, like Netflix, have larger collections and charge a fairly minimal monthly fee for access to all of them. Still others, like the Disney Plus channel, offer a premium collection of special films not available anywhere else, also at a price. To another segment of the population, the web is primarily the equivalent of a modern version of the ancient Universal Library of Alexandria, a place to go to read all the texts written by the greatest minds of all time, past and present, on every imaginable topic from every corner of the world. Of course, the Library of Alexandria in its heyday in the 2nd century or so BC only had about 400,000 documents and was only accessible to a very tiny segment of mankind. The Internet Universal Library is accessible to anyone with a computer or cell phone and stores billions upon billions of documents by the greatest minds of past and present in every language. It's a utopia for bookworms. To still another segment of the population, the web is primarily like a huge video game parlor. Back before the internet, if you wanted to play computerized games on a screen, you originally had to go to a separate building that had a set of those games that you'd feed quarters into. Eventually, computerized games were adapted to play on home computers, but you'd have to buy each separate game on a cartridge or CD and load it into your computer. You could play such games either by yourself or perhaps with from 1 to 3 other friends or family members who had to be hooked up to your computer with their own controllers. But now the dedicated gamer can go online on the web and find an unlimited number of games to play anytime, any day, many of them at no cost. The web has long been a utopia for bookworms, and in the past decade and more, it has become a utopia for gamers. And not just ones who want to play computerized games solo or with a small group of friends or family. With many online games, you can now interact with an unlimited number of other players from around the world who are hooked together through the game's website. There are adventure games, war games, mystery games, quest games, something for everyone. In fact, if you don't care for getting involved in active warfare or adventures or mysteries, there are even game sites where you can play on-screen versions of old-fashioned card games and board games and puzzle book games like Sudoku. And then there's that segment of the American population who more than anything want immediate access to places where they can just hang out with their friends from locally and across the nation anytime, day or night. For them, the web is an online version of the old Happy Days Arnold's Diner, a place where you can swap stories about what you've been doing, what you plan to do, see what everybody's wearing and eating, talk about your problems, and get advice or encouragement, complain about what's been bugging you. And thus you have all the many social media sites like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and the more recent TikTok. Yes, the web is different things to different segments of the population. I could add many more, but what I want to focus on in this video series is what it is primarily to me. I do use the internet to read my email, check the weather, keep up with the news, look at cute cat pictures. But when it comes to how I use it for the lion's share of my time spent online, it's something quite different to me than to many people. I got on the web for the first time in 1996, and it didn't take me long to discover what it primarily is to me. It's America's attic. I'll be taking viewers along on an exploration of that metaphorical attic in this video, and probably several more in a series. In the earliest days of the World Wide Web, most of the web pages and their content were put up by specific commercial or educational or information sources, such as newspapers and magazines, TV networks, educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, or businesses. Doing the technical work necessary to create a digital version of a website took a certain amount of programming skills and equipment. But by early 1997, simple software was being developed that made it possible for the average person with no computer programming knowledge at all to create at least a simple website as easily as creating a word processing document. By less than a year after I got online, I was up and running with my own website I called The Oasis. Here's one of the pages of that first website. My site didn't have a lot of bells and whistles, and in fact did look just like an MS Word document. But I could post on it any writing and pictures that I wanted to share with people who might stumble across my site while surfing the World Wide Web. When I first started on the web in early 1996, the Google search engine wasn't available yet. The search engine I used at the time was called Alta Vista. I was absolutely thrilled when I found out web surfers could type in my name and the words The Oasis in the Alta Vista search box and be given a link to get to my website. By late 1997, Google search was up and running and very soon beat out almost all the competition. I was then pleased to find that indeed surfers could get to my website by a Google search. It wasn't too long before I realized that if I could make a website so easily and could upload to it writings and drawings and photos easily to share with the world, surely more and more individuals could do the same thing. Each person would upload the things that they were enthusiastic about. And unlike my website, many people were more interested in sharing things rather than abstract ideas. What kind of things? It was soon obvious that the collectors of the world wanted to share what they'd collected. Obviously, they couldn't put objects up on the web the way you could donate them to a museum and have them tangibly displayed, but you could take photos of everything and upload those. And many of those things were what are termed ephemeral. When first used in English in the 16th century, the word was used as a scientific term, as an adjective describing things like short-term fevers and insects that had very short lifespans. This ephemeral mayfly lives for only one day in its adult form. Later, a noun version of the term, ephemera, was used in library and information science to describe transitory written or printed matters that are not meant to be retained or preserved, meant to be thrown away after one use. This would include such mundane items as matchbook covers, pictorial calendars, greeting cards, catalogs, pamphlets, and tickets to such events as movies or plays. Large academic and national libraries and museums may collect, organize, and preserve ephemera like those items as useful primary historical source material. There is even a very active group called the Ephemera Society of America. Back before the internet, the main place a wide variety of collectors could share their ephemera collections with a wider audience than just friends and family and local townspeople was in an exhibition room at the annual conference of the Ephemera Society, where they could be enjoyed by people with a shared passion for whatever the specialty of the exhibitor was. And then along came the World Wide Web. Much of the early photos uploaded in the late 1990s by avid collectors to their own websites were of just this kind of ephemera, and this continues right up to today. Now, even a collector from a very small town out in the middle of nowhere can know that his collection is up where it can be admired by huge crowds. And that's where I got the title for this video. Many people start down the path of collecting various kinds of ephemera by discovering a small collection of objects in the attic of their parents or grandparents. Some will have added to those collections over the years through their own efforts. And now they are taking those collections and storing them in America's attic, up in cyberspace on the web, where millions of people, including me, can rummage around and stumble across them. Objects used in daily life of all kinds, including the passing fashions of various eras in our history, can also be considered ephemera. Like this historical shoe collection going back to as early as 1900, gathered by the fellow who recently put his collection up for sale on the web. Many people collect such items, but it's also popular these days to just collect vintage advertising material for such items, such as these Victorian-era hats. As a student and researcher of American history, I've found that often it is only seeing and examining the ephemera of an era, produced and used by the masses, that actually helps us understand what life was really like in any time in our history, such as the very strange 1970s, as seen in these photos from the collection of 1970s men's clothing advertisements displayed on the Plaid Stallions website. Formal history, the kind in grade school and high school and college textbooks, all too often focuses almost entirely on the life and doings of politicians and military men and famous industrialists and inventors of any era rather than what life was like for the average citizen. It focuses almost entirely on the activities of such people, wars, elections, fortunes made, groundbreaking inventions, and ignores what filled up the time of the average citizen. It's only by exploring the ephemera of an age that we can get a three-dimensional view of what life has really been like in America throughout our 250-year history. In the rest of this episode about exploring America's attic, I want to tell a few very personal stories of how rummaging in that attic allowed me to bring history to life in very personal ways for some family members. In later episodes, we'll take a look at what all sorts of attic ephemera can teach us about the broader American history narrative. The guide we will follow to do our exploring of America's attic is the Google search engine. Although there are a few other search engines out there, the one created by Google in 1997 has been used for so long by the vast majority of web visitors that the term you use for looking something up on the web is Googling, even if you are using some other search engine like Yahoo. I suppose many folks love Google search because, for instance, they can quickly look up the lyrics to an old song from the early 1960s that they have stuck in their head at 2 a.m. and can't remember the words to verse 2. Others no doubt love it for how easily they can get quick info to finish a college term paper on the mating habits of pygmy marmosets. Still others may use it to settle bets with friends, like just what team did win the World Series in 1957. Me, I'm grateful for Google search because it allows me to quickly and efficiently search America's attic for the ingredients to create small miracles for friends and family that have made them smile. I'm going to share the basic details of a few Googlefied miracles I've performed for my own family. Although they are interesting in themselves, I share them in particular to perhaps inspire some viewers to consider using this miraculous tool to explore America's attic themselves and bring smiles to their own friends and family. No, these aren't big, flashy, supernatural miracles, but small, intimate miracles nonetheless, proven to be that by the smiles and gentle joy they brought to people I care about. Miracles that couldn't have been done in 1995 or earlier, that truly do bless the recipients. I've been blessed by seeing those smiles. Come join me for the experience, and maybe you'll end up wanting to be a miracle worker too. For the final few years before my parents both passed away at age 87 in 2009, about a year after this photo was taken, they were continually amazed at the little miracles I performed for them via Google, although they were completely computer illiterate and had no clue what a Google was. Sometimes it was something very simple. This was my dad with me in 2007 at age 85. As you might guess from the insignia on the front of his jacket, Dad was a Marine serving in the South Pacific during World War II. As you see, he was proud that 65 years later, he could still fit in one of his World War II Marine jacket and pants outfits. When Dad unpacked his beloved paper shredder right after a move to a new home that year in 2007, he discovered it had quit working. He was utterly paranoid about shredding every little receipt and bill he got for anything lest someone steal his identity, and it really troubled him that the gadget wouldn't work. He no longer had the instruction manual that came with it, so he hadn't a clue what to do to troubleshoot the problem. His solution was to plan to literally sneak into the local Walmart, find a box containing the same model shredder in the office supply department, pry the box open when no one was looking, and extract the manual, quickly reseal the box, and slip away to another part of the store to look through the manual. Then he'd reverse the procedure to return the manual, hoping no one would catch him at it. Yes, he was seriously considering doing this and revealed his plan to me. I told him to wait on it for a bit. I took down the name and model number of the shredder on a slip of paper, walked across the street to my apartment, Googled the information, and instantly found a digital copy of the manual for the item on a cyber shelf in America's attic. I printed it out, returned to his apartment, and presented it to him all in less than 30 minutes. He was stunned. I might as well have turned a lump of coal into a diamond. My little trick seemed as miraculous to him. As it turned out, he'd just forgotten which buttons, in what order, to press to turn the gadget on. The manual fixed his problem instantly. Another time, Dad mentioned feeling nostalgic about a favorite song recording he hadn't heard since it was popular on the jukeboxes during World War II. He sure wished he could hear it again. In decades past, he'd inquired at music stores, but no one could ever find it for him.
Masquerade eye and chapel by day shade. Tangerine with her lips aflame. If the color keeps, Louis Philippe's to blame. And I've seen clothes on Tangerine where the label says from Macy's mezzanine. Yes, she's got the guys in a whirl, but she's only fooling one girl. She's only fooling Tangerine.
That's the song. That YouTube video version of it wasn't uploaded to America's Attic until several years later. But even back in 2007, I still was able to go back to my apartment and within 15 minutes Googled the title, Tangerine, and the singer, Helen O'Connell, singing with the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra, found a listing for a used record of it in good condition at an online record shop, took down the order information, and returned with it. He called in his order, and within days he was listening with nostalgia to Tangerine for probably the first time in over 60 years. Another time, Dad mentioned that he really had fond memories of hearing the bugle calls in Marine Corps boot camp in 1942, reveille, taps, mail call, and so on, and wished he could hear them again. Years earlier, he had met a man at a Marine Corps reunion who had a 33 RPM record of the bugle calls, and he said he later wished he'd gotten from the man the information where he'd purchased it. Yes, I went home and Googled Marine bugle calls. Within 5 minutes or less, I'd found a cyberbox in America's Attic with MP3 sound files of the complete collection of all the calls, no doubt uploaded by some equally nostalgic Marines. Within a few minutes more, I downloaded the files and returned to Dad's apartment, ready to play them for him. He was once again astonished. Another time, in 2009, Dad pulled a crumpled scrap of paper out of his billfold and showed it to me. On it, clear back in the early 1980s, he had scribbled down part of the lyrics to a ballad about cowboys that he heard on the radio and loved. He waxed eloquent about how profound the sound was and how much he'd always wished he could hear it again. But he couldn't even remember the name of the song, just those snippets of lyrics. Dad had been a big fan of the Old West and cowboy mythology all his life, and had subscriptions to several magazines on the topic, like these. When I was 4 years old, in 1950, my parents and I lived for about a year in Cody, Wyoming, 60 miles east of Yellowstone National Park. I'm sure Dad would have liked to have had a little boy he could have turned into a miniature cowboy while we were out there in the West, but he had no sons, just me. So he did his best to try to turn me into a cowgirl. It worked for a while. Named after famous soldier, bison killer, Army scout, and showman William F. Buffalo Bill Cody, Cody, Wyoming was founded in 1895 by Buffalo Bill himself. The town of Cody featured all sorts of Buffalo Bill memorabilia, including this mounted statue of him. That's me standing in front of the horse's hind legs. If there was any place Dad could have turned me into a cowgirl that he wanted, it surely would have been Cody, Wyoming. As you might guess, Dad, who was born in 1922, had been a big fan of cowboy movies his whole life, particularly those starring John Wayne. Wayne had his first starring role in this film from 1930 when Dad would have been 8. I'll bet he saw that first one in the theater and continued to go to every one he could thereafter. Wayne died in 1979, so to continue feeding his cowboy movie yearnings in later years, Dad eventually adopted a new favorite actor who starred in Wild West movies, Sam Elliott. He was so enamored of Elliott that when my daughter Ramona gave birth to his first great-grandchild, a boy she named Jonathan, Dad insisted on giving him the nickname Sam. That puzzled little Jonathan until he got old enough to understand that Dad intended it as an honor, and Jonathan embraced it. But back to Dad's yearning to hear that song he'd scribbled on that paper in the 1980s. Yep, once again, I went back to my apartment, Googled just a few of the lyrics he'd scribbled down, and within a couple of minutes of rummaging in America's attic, I found it. I found it was titled Last Cowboy Song and had been composed and first recorded in 1980 by a singer named Ed Bruce. Within a few more minutes, I had the whole set of lyrics, photos of Ed Bruce, and a link to a video on YouTube that had the actual original song featuring Bruce singing it as background to a video slideshow of authentic cowboy photos. Within another 10 minutes, I had printed out an attractive 8.5 by 11 poster with Ed's picture on it surrounded by the lyrics, and I downloaded the YouTube video to take to Dad to watch on my portable computer. I eventually burned the audio on a CD for him to play on his own CD player, along with some other songs he had wanted. Again, he was stunned. He framed the poster and put it in an honored place on his mantle. Actually, these pictures are of that video on YouTube that I screen grabbed just today, 12 years later. It's still there. The information on the page shows it was uploaded 14 years ago by some old fellow nostalgic about cowboys in the same way my dad was. He obviously did a labor of love making a slideshow of old authentic cowboy photos and adding the song as the soundtrack. I'm so grateful he stuck it up in America's attic right then, 27 years after the song had been a hit, years after most people had long forgotten it if they'd even heard it in 1980. It had been uploaded just in time for me to find it. If my dad had asked me about the song 3 years earlier, I wouldn't have been able to find it. I'm certainly grateful that the owners of the song's copyright allowed it to stay up there over the years for so many nostalgic people to find it. The statistics on the page show that over 8 million people have watched it since it was uploaded in 2007. You may have never heard of the song before, but I'll bet you've heard another song Ed Bruce composed. Yes, he wrote and first recorded the classic 1975 song, Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys. In 1979, Willie Nelson's version of the song was featured in the soundtrack of the blockbuster film The Electric Horseman with Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. If you're old enough, you may even remember Ed Bruce also from the 1982 Brett Maverick TV show. He co-starred in that with James Garner. In addition to that video of the last cowboy song that I shared with my dad on YouTube, you can also now see a version of a live performance of the song from back in the 1980s in which Ed does a duet with Willie Nelson. And you can also see a rousing rendition of a live performance of the song by the Highwaymen, the supergroup made up of Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson, who played together from 1985 to 1995. If you're wondering what was so compelling to my dad about the lyrics of the last cowboy song, I'll share them shortly. It might help to know, before you hear the words, that after his extreme experiences as a young World War II Marine participating in the violence of war in the South Pacific for 2 years, and having the camaraderie of intense fellowship with other Marines in those chaotic times, the rest of his life was extremely lonely and boring. These pics of him in his dress uniforms and his khakis were of a barely 20-year-old kid in 1942 before he shipped out to the South Pacific, a kid who had no clue what lay ahead of him. This book about the Battle of Tarawa, one of the bloodiest battles of the South Pacific, has his name in the list of injured and killed in the back. On November 20th, 1943, he and the other men in his Marine Division jumped out from their landing boats quite a ways from the shore of the small island of Tarawa. They slogged on foot through the water toward what they thought was an empty island, but the enemy was hidden in underground bunkers. As soon as hundreds upon hundreds of the young men, weighed down in full battle gear, were totally bogged down and soggy in the water, the enemy revealed themselves and picked off huge numbers of Marines like fish in a barrel. Dad was wounded severely in that battle. He returned home to the States while those of his comrades who escaped serious injury at Tarawa sailed on to the Battle of Iwo Jima. Here he is receiving his Purple Heart. Now mind you, of course he had no nostalgia about the horrors he endured, but the experiences and the ultimate victory of America in World War II did give him a sense of purpose and meaning in life. And going through such experiences together certainly can build deep friendships. He never talked about the violence, but many decades after the war he fondly remembered in detail many of the men he served with. Dad was like so many of the men who served in World War II, the war that rescued the world from the specter of totalitarian rule by Hitler and Tojo, and that was supposed to finish what hadn't been accomplished by World War I, to make the world safe for democracy. There was no way for those World War II veterans to ever recapture those glory days after they returned to civilian life. After trying a number of different jobs, Dad ended up spending most of the rest of his life as a mailman in a small town in northern Michigan, getting up at the crack of dawn to deliver mail 6 days a week. A totally lonely task with no sense of camaraderie with other mailmen. Many of those years weren't even doing an in-town walking route where he would have had daily exercise and might actually run into people on the street or at houses to have at least occasional brief conversations with. No, he drove a rural mail route, many months of the year through snowstorms, and his schedule gave him no real time or outlet to develop friendships some other way in the community. It was a life he basically hated, but found no way to escape, except into the fantasy illusions he nurtured over the years of what it might have been like to have hung out around a campfire under the wide open skies on the high plains with the fictional characters portrayed by the likes of John Wayne and Sam Elliott in the movies, gearing up for the next day's excitement. You'll notice a poignancy in the lyrics I'm about to share. Ed Bruce notes wistfully that those modern young men who would have, in an earlier era in America, been able to head out to a life of excitement on those high plains, to herd cattle and live the free life, are instead stuck in mundane jobs like working in a market selling beer, watching the semis carrying cattle roaring by on the interstate.
This is the last cowboy song, the end of 100-year waltz. The voices sound sad as they're singing along. Another piece of America's lost.
And the wistful words to the song continue. He rides a feedlot and clerks in a market on weekends selling tobacco and beer. His dreams of tomorrow surrounded by fences, but he'll dream tonight of when fences weren't here. He blazed the trail with Lewis and Clark, and eyeball to eyeball old Wyatt backed down. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Travis in Texas, and rode with the 7th when Custer went down. Remington showed us how he looked on canvas, and Louis L'Amour has told us his tale. And Willie and Waylon and me sing about him and wish to God we could have ridden his trail. The old Chisholm Trail is covered in concrete now, and they truck him to market in 50-foot rigs. They blow by his market, never slowing to reason, like living and dying was all that he did. This is the last cowboy song, the end of 100-year waltz. Voices sound sad as they're singing along. Another piece of America's lost. Yes, thinking of that young man in the beer store wishing he could be where there are no fences is certainly bittersweet. Thinking of my dad trapped for years in a mail truck in snowstorms, delivering mail to people he'd never see, wishing he could be laughing and having fun around a cozy campfire with Sam and John is bittersweet too. Never mind that Dad might well have actually hated the life of a real cowboy so long ago. Being realistic, it wasn't nearly as romantic and exhilarating as it was often portrayed in the movies. Much of the time, it was likely just horribly hot or horribly cold, and exhausting and often boring, and lonely some of the time. But dreams, like those my dad had, don't have to line up with reality. They are a place you can escape to in your head. I'm glad I helped my dad escape for a bit in his old age by bringing this song back to him just months before he died. Yes, all that poking around in America's attic produced just small miracles, but this one sure made my dad smile. As you might have guessed, while I was performing little miracles for my dad, I also did a few for my mother. In 1986, Mother suffered a massive stroke, which left her whole left side paralyzed. Dad, who had just retired that year from his 30-year job as a postal carrier, insisted on being her sole caretaker for the rest of her life, even as he got older and frailer himself, until just days before he died unexpectedly in 2009 at age 87. At that age, he was still a tough old Marine, both caring for her and taking care of house cleaning and cooking and doing the wash and growing grocery shopping and everything else necessary to keep the home running. Although Mother could think normally in most ways, the stroke had left her blind in the left eye and unable to read or write anything more than a single word or phrase at a time. She also had what is called aphasia, a condition often characterized by being able to clearly think of ideas, words, or phrases in the head, but have them come out confused or garbled by the time they're spoken. And with the paralysis of left arm and leg, she had no way to really indulge in any hobbies that required two hands or getting up and walking around. So Dad was always looking for things to help her while away the long hours. Of course, they spent a lot of time watching TV, but she couldn't follow along with complex storylines for dramas or sitcoms or old movies. So their TV diet consisted mostly of Wheel of Fortune and a never-ending parade of CNN news shows or court TV. She could solve the simple word puzzles on Wheel of Fortune and loved Vanna White and her pretty dresses. And she actually could follow stories about political and entertainment personalities in the news and liked watching the pretty lady anchors on CNN like Lynn Russell. She devoured many, many hours of the O.J. Simpson trial proceedings that were broadcast live every day on court TV from January to October in 1995. She particularly loved watching Judge Ito be snarky with the defense lawyers and the DA lawyers. The various quirky personalities of the lawyers, from District Attorney Marcia Clark to Defense Attorney F. Lee Bailey, made for a lot of entertainment. But no one can watch TV every waking hour, so Dad struggled to find other pastimes for Mother over the years. Early on, it became obvious that one option that she enjoyed and could accomplish with her various limitations was putting together children's jigsaw puzzles, at least ones with only 100 pieces, so he started buying them for her. At some point in the 1990s, he bought her the one you see here, part of the Where's Waldo series, this one, Where's Waldo at the Safari Park. For some reason, it clicked with her in a way no other puzzle had. She would tolerate doing any puzzle he'd give her, but in the end, she always wanted him to take away all the others and put the Waldo box on the TV tray in front of her chair so she could take off the lid, dump the pieces on the tray, and put it together one more time. And in the last years of her life, she finally got to where she insisted it had to be all Waldo all the time. She would put it together, take it apart, and put it together again many times a day. It was familiar and soothing. Over the years, age and the constant handling of the pieces had seriously faded the colors, and in some cases almost rubbed out the portion of the illustrations printed on some pieces. And then the unthinkable happened. One day in 2008, I stopped by their apartment, and Mother was very distressed. She'd lost one of the pieces. Dad had checked everywhere he could think of, under her wheelchair, down the side of the seat cushion, maybe kicked across the floor under another piece of furniture, or in nearby trash baskets, but it was nowhere to be found. I tried to reassure her that it would be found in a day or two, even though I was pretty sure it was gone permanently. But of course, I knew what I'd do as soon as I got back to my computer later in the day. I'd go searching in America's attic. Not for the missing piece, of course, but for an exact copy of that puzzle. It was almost 20 years old by then and likely out of production, but I knew that several people across the land had likely owned one, perhaps still unopened in their own attic, and might want to get rid of it and make a few bucks in the process. So they would have placed a photo of that puzzle in the corner of America's attic called eBay. I checked on eBay again just today, 13 years after that incident, and even today there is indeed a used Where's Waldo Safari Park puzzle for sale. In fact, not just this used one, a little rough around the edges, offered for the luxury price of $30. There are a total of 56 of the exact same puzzle offered for sale by various people in various states of preservation. This one was even in a pristine, sealed, never opened box. The owner of this mint condition one was willing to part for it for under $13, including shipping. Back in 2008, I think I only found one for sale in very good condition and ended up paying $20, including shipping for it. A bargain to make my mother very happy. It came in just a few days, and when I presented it to her, she almost cried. As she opened the box, her first exclamation was about how bright and colorful the pieces were. She'd totally forgotten how it looked when she first got it. And in fact, some of the old pieces were so worn it wasn't even clear exactly what was on them. She put the new puzzle together and just beamed, and looked the picture all over to see what those fuzzy portions had been. However, she was such a creature of habit that she decided she didn't want to work daily with the new puzzle. She wanted to lovingly preserve it for some indeterminate time in the future. She just took out the one piece she needed to complete her old puzzle and left the rest boxed up. She liked looking at the picture on the new box occasionally just to admire it, but she had no intention of risking losing any of those new pieces by actually using them daily. But now all was right with the world. She could go back to putting her beloved puzzle together and not see some gaping hole where a piece was missing. All because the hoarding and sharing of Americans has made available America's Attic, where anyone can rummage through an embarrassment of riches anytime they want. I've been showing you how exploring America's Attic with the help of Google can equip you with the ingredients to bring about little miracles for friends and family. Now I'd like to share something else it can do at the same exact time. It can guide you into a corner of America's Attic that allows you to enter a twilight zone of virtual time travel where such miracles can happen. This story involves my mother again, a few years before the Where's Waldo puzzle incident. To understand this story, you need to know a bit about Mother's background. Her name at birth was Pearlie Mae Allen. She had been born in Nebraska in 1922. A couple of years later, she was blessed with a baby brother, Wallace Allen. Here are her parents, Frank and Irene Allen, and their first two children, Pearlie and Wallace. Pearlie later had a younger sister named Maxine. Wallace was a cheerful, even-tempered child who brought joy to his parents and siblings. Wallace turned 18 right in the thick of World War II, and like so many other young men of his generation, found himself in the military. His choice was the U.S. Army Air Force. This is him in a portrait studio before he shipped out to Europe, posing proudly in his dress uniform with his family, between Pearlie on the left and their younger sister Maxine, and then posing again in the portrait shoot between Maxine and Pearlie. Mother loved her brother dearly and was devastated when word came late in the war that he had died in an air battle over France while serving as a bomber tail gunner. As I was growing up, she never talked much about him, but there was always a large framed copy of that photo of him as a little boy, and another of this one of him in his uniform, displayed prominently in my parents' home wherever they lived. Hanging in a closet was his World War II brown leather bomber jacket. As I mentioned earlier, in 1986, at age 64, Mother suffered a massive stroke, which left her paralyzed on her whole left side and blind in her left eye. but her memory for incidents of the past had not been affected by her brain injury, and her sense of nostalgia was strong. One day in 2004, Dad dug out a big box of letters she had kept since World War II. Many of them were no doubt sent between the two of them. They'd married in 1942, and Bob served with the Marines in the South Pacific. She wanted to rummage through the letters and have him read some to her. One 1945 letter really caught her attention. It was from a man named Morris Sunshine, written some months after Wallace's death, and was addressed to her parents in Traverse City, Michigan. Morris had been a good friend of Wallace in the military, and he was writing to mention he hoped to make a trip to deliver his condolences to the family in person. Mother remembered learning that Morris had indeed come for that visit and had spent a few hours sharing thoughts about Wallace with her dad, Frank, and sister Maxine, who were home at the time. But then the family never heard from him again. She had inherited the letter when her mother Irene had died in the 1980s and had preserved it in her collection for years. When she saw it and my dad read the message in it to her, it brought in a sweeping melancholy about the loss of her brother when he was so young. She wondered what Wallace had been like during his years in the service, what others thought of him, and wished there was some way to contact the man belonging to this voice from the past who might be able to fill in some blanks for her. Morris would, of course, be almost 80 years old himself, and she assumed the chances of finding him somewhere in the U.S. would be close to zero. Dad made a couple of attempts to trace him through the return address on the 59-year-old letter and phone books in the state where he lived as a young man, but had no success. Then they happened to mention Mother's yearning to me on the phone one day, and of course I immediately thought of America's Attic. It took perhaps 15 minutes to find him, but finally on a web page put up by the United States Army Air Force World War II 384th Bombardment Group that was stationed in Grafton, Underwood, England, I found a tiny little pic of Staff Sergeant Morris Sunshine. The picture was on a website section called Real Stories of Honor, and accompanied a story written by Staff Sergeant Sunshine he had titled Mission to St. Lo, about an experience he had during the war. Shortly after D-Day, his bomber group had attacked German forces occupying a town named St. Lo in the Normandy region of France. How did I know that this was the right Morris Sunshine? Because as I looked at the caption on this picture of his bomber squadron illustrating the story, I was startled to notice one of the men in the pic was Staff Sergeant Wallace F. Allen, my uncle. And even more poignantly and shockingly, as I read Morris's St. Lo story, I finally realized it was a description of the bombing run during which Wallace was killed by German fire. What were the chances of this? Morris, a top turret gunner, described Wallace as his best friend and told of the moment he realized Wallace was dead. And there was no chance Morris could forget the date. It was the day after his own 20th birthday, July 25th, 1944. At that moment, I felt like I'd entered the Twilight Zone. I'd been taken back in America's Attic to a frozen moment in time that was of major personal significance to my own family. And I also realized I'd been given an opportunity to get in touch with a time traveler who could take my mother back to 1945 to get a glimpse, alive, not dead, of her brother. There was no contact information for Morris on the website, so I wrote to the webmaster and explained my situation, describing my aging mother and how much it would mean to her to actually hear from Morris Sunshine in person, perhaps by phone. She replied promptly. She had sent my inquiry along to him. Dear Pam, I am forwarding this message from Morris at his request. The only way he can communicate with you or your family effectively is by email, as Morris himself so eloquently describes below. Please take care in your communique with Morris and let him set the rules. He's my special friend. Your friend, Carol S. Dear Carol, Please get in touch with Pam Dewey for me and tell her that I cannot speak to her by phone because of the strong emotional factor despite the passage of more than 50 years. Previous experience shows that strong emotions take my voice away and I begin to dissolve. Very embarrassing for everyone while I try to find my tongue. So the only way we can talk is by computer keyboard. I do have Pam Dewey's email address and I will contact her soon. And though I am pleased to be of service to Wallace Allen's family, he was my dearest friend, I need to put on a special suit of psychological armor before I go into those dark and dusty places in my memory. It's very rusty, it does not fit very well, and it pinches badly in certain places, so she will have to be patient. Now that I think about it, perhaps the easiest thing for you to do would be to forward a copy of this letter to her. Thanks and best wishes, Maury. I certainly understood Maury's ground rules and was just thrilled that he was willing to communicate by email with my family. In fact, the 2 emails he subsequently sent to our family left us with a permanent record of his gracious comments. They were indeed of great comfort to my mother. I'm going to share with you some excerpts of the trip down memory lane into the past that Maury provided for Mother in 2004. Just recently, it dawned on me how much more vividly I could have helped Mother see Maury's glimpses of Wallace's past if I had access back in 2004 to nooks and crannies of the America's Attic that didn't exist back then, but are accessible to me now. Almost every paragraph in his emails includes names of places and things that I can now find many photos of and information about in that attic. I'll be sharing those visuals in this video along with the narrative. Strangely enough, even for me, through Maury's words about Wallace Allen, along with all these photos that are related to the narrative of events in his life, my Uncle Wallace has become something more than just a face on an old black and white photo I'd seen all my life on the wall. He has become a 3-dimensional young man with a real life story and real qualities that make me wish I had been able to meet and get to know him when I was a child. I'm pretty sure he would have been my favorite uncle. So here are Maury's words that he shared with my mother. We'll start with email number 1. I first met Wallace Allen at the Peyote, Texas Army Air Corps Base, where we were assigned to a B-17 air crew. That was probably in the early months of 1944. All of us had been to air gunnery school in Nevada, but did not know what gunnery position we would ultimately occupy until we were assigned to a crew. Peyote, Texas was in the western desert area of Texas. The sand blew and it was hot, but we were young and willing. I have no memories of Wallace in Texas. I know that we hardly ever went to town because Peyote had nothing to see and we were too young to drink anything but soda pop. There were probably 10,000 guys to every Peyotean girl, so we mostly stayed on base. I remember that every gunner tried out every gunnery position on a B-17, and except in one case, freely chose the one that they wanted. The one case was top turret. George Hunter wanted that position, but the pilot said that he was too short, so he assigned me to that position. Therefore, if Wallace was a tail gunner, he chose that position. My memories of how we got to England are vague too. In April 1944, we went to North Dakota and picked up a brand new B-17, which we then flew to Newfoundland, Canada. From there, we flew to Northern Ireland, refueled, and landed again in Scotland. On the night flight over the Atlantic, the pilot lost control of the airplane. It went into a steep dive from about 10,000 to 2,000 feet, and he was lucky to have pulled it up before we hit the water. The medical problem is called vertigo. So we almost didn't get to England. I remember that we went by train to what was called a redeployment depot, where newly arrived crews stayed until they were assigned to a bomber group. We could not leave the depot and were frequently buzzed by U.S. and English fighters. They wanted us to learn what their planes looked like so that we would not erroneously shoot at them. We received instruction on English culture and how American English and English English are two different languages. We also got a lecture on venereal disease and on military law as it applied to desertion. The depot was in the countryside, and we saw many houses with thatched roofs. We thought that the English must be very poor. More later. Autobiography is hard to write. Talk to me if the internet will let you. Best wishes, Maury Sunshine. Very shortly, Maury followed that introductory email up with a second one with specific details about his memories of Wallace. Here are the comments from that email. I've been thinking about what to say to you and your family about Wallace, who was my best friend in the Air Force, or Air Corps as it was called then. After the war, you want to forget about all that, and with the urge to forget, you do forget. And with the passage of so many years, I have only a few memories of Wallace. I remember that we went on leave together to London with other members of the crew sometime after D-Day, June 6, 1944. I think that we shared a room together. Once in a while, we went to the local town near our air base, which was always crowded with soldiers. I think that Wallace and I once took leave together and went to Birmingham. Why Birmingham, I cannot say. It was our bad luck that the survivors of the 101st Parachute Division arrived back from their bloody fight in Normandy when we got there. The 101st tore the town apart celebrating. The British police and the Army military police had their hands full, and the streets were filled with drunken paratroopers. I think Wallace and I decided to return to our hotel, where we met up with the crowd I'm talking about, and our leave was spent mostly meeting paratroopers and trying to keep out of fights. I suppose that we were about the same age. When I flew my first combat mission, about May 20th, 1944, I was 19 years old, really just a kid. I suppose Wallace, I always called him Alan and he called me Sunshine, was about the same age. In every respect, we were ignorant and innocent. We didn't like Hitler and the Nazis and the Germans, and it was our job to fight. Beyond that, our historical knowledge was nil. A B-17 bomber crew was a small group of tightly knit people because we depended on each other. I remember on one of our early missions near the end of May 1944, the ball turret gunner realized that he had forgotten to bring his parachute aboard. Unfortunately, he remembered as we were approaching the English Channel on our way to the most heavily defended target in Europe, Berlin. If Chapman had asked the pilot to return to base, the pilot would have done so, but we would not have made that mission. In circumstances like that, the whole crew would have had to make a seeming extra mission. In the end, the enlisted men kept Chapman's secret. He was ready to sacrifice his life, if need be, so that the crew would not have to abort the mission. But coming back to 1944, perhaps the best thing I can do is describe the world of aerial war that Wallace and his crew and thousands of other flyers faced that summer in 1944. I will do that with my next email. Actually, after receiving that second email, we lost contact with Maury and never heard from him again. I'm suspicious that given his age and serious health issues, he'd likely passed on before he could write again. But actually, he did provide that description of aerial war in his original story that I had found on the 384th website. Here is the portion of the story that discusses the circumstances of my Uncle Wallace's death. I remember July 24th, 1944 for a variety of reasons. First, we were being asked to directly intervene in a major ground offensive. Second, the mission would be flown at a dangerously low altitude for slow-moving heavy bombers. Third, the bombing had to be very precise lest we bomb our own troops. And lastly, it was my 20th birthday. I can still remember the huge groan of disbelief as we were told that the target would be bombed from 12,000 feet, an altitude so low that we would not need oxygen and the German flak gunners would not need gun sights. That morning, as I got to our B-17, I was not thinking about my birthday. I was trying, like everybody else, to find an extra flak suit to spread out around the base of my top turret. I think that our crew chief went through the planes that were not flying that mission and came back with a few spares. They ended up laying in the waist walkway. It was a day for flak suits, flak helmets, and good luck charms. The only thing we had going for us was the hope that the bomber groups leading the way would take out the flak. Of course, the mission on July 24, 1944 failed. We could not find the bomb line that separated friendly from enemy forces despite our low altitude, so our squadron brought its bombs home. We had never done that before, and I know I was praying that a bomb would not break loose in the bomb bay as we touched down. Because we turned back before crossing the bomb line, I do not think that we caught much flak. It was a classic milk run, as far as my crew was concerned, and we certainly hoped that General Bradley could get along without us in the future. A badly mistaken view. On July 25th, we learned that it was St. Lo again at 12,000 feet. This time, I was really worried. We'd previously flown to Berlin, and I had seen lots of nasty flak, big black puffs with angry red glowing centers following us closely as we dropped our bombs from 33,000, repeat, 33,000 feet. And we were throwing out hundreds of bundles of chaff, too. So the basis for concern, that is, fear, was there. If they were too close at 33,000 feet, think what they could do to you at 12,000. And this time, we would not have the advantage of surprise. The crew chiefs were all running around trying to find spare flak suits again. I should not be surprised if a couple of extra parachute chest packs were put aboard. As I looked at a B-17 crew nearby suiting up and getting ready to start engines, I did not see any brave men. I saw lots of guys hoping that someone would announce that the mission was scrubbed permanently. I have no memories of taking off or crossing the British Channel. Our squadron was a bit spread out and the pilots were trying hard to get into close formation. As the top turret gunner, I was watching overhead to protect against falling bombs from friendly aircraft. The ball turret gunner was doing the same thing. The navigator and the toggleer were looking for markers indicating the bomb line. The bomb doors were open. We were flying the mission as briefed at about 12,000 feet. As top turret gunner, I could not see the target area. Looking forward, I could see the bomber groups queued up ahead of us. The flak was greeting them. It was not Berlin, Leipzig, or Munich, but there was enough to trigger the adrenaline and cause the heartbeat rate to double, maybe triple. About that time, I heard the tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Wally Allen, call out, "Flak behind us and low." I swung my turret to 6 o'clock and looked. Black flak tracking us and getting closer. Allen said something again, I don't remember exactly what. The next burst was closer. Still behind us, but the flak's altitude was improving. Projecting where the next shell would burst, I was convinced that we were finished, dead. I keyed the mic and shouted, "Pull her up!" Naturally, as we were on the bomb run, there was no option to maneuver, and we didn't. The shell exploded with an audible noise behind and just below us. I was astonished to still be alive and that the plane was still flying. I don't know where the next flak burst went, but I do remember the toggleer shouting, "Bombs away!" The formation seemed to loosen up, and as we turned away from the target, I looked down, but could only see smoke and dust in the target area. When we cleared the target area, the navigator asked the crew to check in. There was no response from the tail gunner. The pilot ordered one of the waist gunners to investigate. I assumed it was merely some sort of intercom problem, but in a few minutes the waist gunner reported that Wally Allen had been fatally wounded. As soon as we hit the channel, the pilot got permission to break away from the group and head straight to Grafton Underwood. I climbed out of my turret and went back to the waist. I thought that there might be some sort of mistake. The two waist gunners were sitting on the floor. I peered back into the tail and saw that Wally's parachute had been opened and used to cover his body. I asked George Hunter if he was sure that Allen was dead. He said that he was sure. He did not know where the flak had hit him, but there was blood all over. There was nothing to be done, according to George. I sat down on the floor near the waist guns, stunned, refusing to believe that my best friend was dead. Death was something that happened to other people, in other planes, not here, and not now. I don't remember what happened next. Maybe I was crying or shaking, but I remember somebody putting an arm around me and offering me a cigarette. I was just 20, and it was the first cigarette I had ever smoked. Months later, after completing my tour and returning to the States, I went to Traverse City, Michigan to see Wally Allen's family. We had made certain promises to each other, so I had to go. And I told his father and sister about what we did for General Bradley at St. Lo. In 1995, I contracted tuberculosis. The doctor asked me if I was a smoker. I said I'd quit years ago. He asked me when I first started smoking and added somewhat sympathetically, it was okay to make a reasonable guess. I said, I know exactly when I started smoking. It was July 25th, 1944. He looked at me in amazement. How do you know that? I replied, that was the day we bombed St. Lo. Still amazed, he said, where is St. Lo? It was, of course, sad to read of the details of Wallace's death, but it strangely brought closure for my mother, especially when combined with the vignettes of Wallace's life that Morris had shared. I'm still amazed a decade later that my family was able to take this trip back in time via the twilight zone I encountered in America's attic. What better epitaph could a man want than what Morris Sunshine wrote as his final comments about Wallace F. Allen in that second email? I can best describe him by saying that his main feature was purity. By that I mean he was idealistic, sweet, never aggressive, never used bad language, never critical of people who deserved criticism, tolerant, uncomplex, humorous, willing to listen to people he disagreed with, and for all these reasons was attractive to girls and respected by his crew and bunkmates. Since the day back in 2004 I read Morris Sunshine's beautiful description of the uncle I never knew, I've thought wistfully of how wonderful it would have been to grow up around him. Stay tuned for future episodes of this series, in which we'll piece together all kinds of fascinating, neglected American history as we continue exploring the ephemera in America's attic.